They thought a quiet farm in the middle of nowhere would be the perfect place to sneak their illegal cargo past unsuspecting neighbors. Little did they know that, hidden among the rows of ripe tomatoes in the hand-painted produce sign, lived a determined mother who had once been a top-tier Marine sniper. The most intense showdown of this entire saga happened on a starless night, when heavily armed men flooded the property and found themselves outmatched by a community that refused to bow down. Bullets tore through the orchard, barns lit up with muzzle flashes, and for every inch the criminals gained, they lost two more to the unwavering defenders. We have so much more to share. This story twists and turns right up to the final confrontation. If you've enjoyed it so far, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling, uplifting tales like this one, and we'd love to have you follow along. Morgan Landry had hoped that the tiny produce stand at the edge of her family's modest acreage would be nothing more than a simple venture for her 8-year-old daughter, Ava. The stand itself was a humble structure, salvaged wood planks nailed together, sporting a bright coat of sunshine yellow paint that Ava had brushed on by hand. A crooked sign reading Ava's Garden Goodies hung overhead, swaying whenever the Texas wind decided to blow through. On a sweltering late summer day, Morgan watched discreetly from her porch as Ava happily arranged baskets of tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, scribbling down prices on index cards with colored markers. For Ava, it was a game, but Morgan saw it as something far more important, an opportunity for her daughter to learn responsibility and feel pride in honest work. Morgan herself had traded in her U.S. Marine sniper rifle for garden gloves in quiet farmland 5 years earlier. After returning from deployments that spanned some of the world's most dangerous battlegrounds, she was determined to build a peaceful life away from the violence she'd once known. The world was not supposed to intrude on her farmland. It was supposed to be their safe haven. Each morning she rose before dawn to tend to the greenhouse and the animals, her long, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, face already smudged with soil by the time the sun crested the horizon. As Ava's produce stand began drawing a trickle of neighbors, older folks curious about the little farm girl and her big dreams, Morgan allowed herself to believe, if only for a moment, that the ghosts of her past had no place here. Then a string of unfamiliar vehicles started rolling through the area. At first, Morgan only heard about them through local chatter. An elderly man at the feed store mentioned seeing black SUVs with tinted windows drive slowly down the old county roads. Deputy Carmen Reyes, a longtime friend, dropped by to chat one afternoon and commented on the uptick in suspicious traffic. Folks in Willowbend County weren't used to new faces or new cars, and certainly not the type that seemed more fitting in a city than on a dusty rural route. Morgan's marine instincts, tucked away but never forgotten, perked up. She took note of the tire treads left behind at the intersection by her driveway, studied them with the same methodical approach that had once made her so formidable on deployments. Something about these vehicles spoke of stealth and intimidation. The tension climbed another notch when Jonas Ford, retired local sheriff and Morgan's closest confidant, showed her photographs taken near the old Miller barn located a few miles down the road. Grainy nighttime snapshots revealed men unloading crates from the backs of dark SUVs, carefully covering their license plates with mud. Jonas, his weathered face full of worry, confided that rumors suggested these men might be part of a cartel operation expanding into rural Texas. Morgan suppressed a chill when she heard the name Los Fieras, a dangerous group reputed for running drugs, arms, and worse along routes that crisscrossed the border. As Jonas admitted that the sheriff's department was undermanned and possibly compromised, Morgan felt her protective instincts sharpen. She wanted no part of the violence she'd once lived by, but for Ava's sake, she would do whatever was necessary to keep their corner of the world safe. The first sign that Ava's modest stand had drawn the wrong kind of attention came on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. Morgan, kneeling in the garden bed to prune her tomato plants, spotted a pair of tinted SUVs lumbering down the gravel road like sleek predators. Ava, in her pink overalls and sun hat, waved innocently as they rolled past. Morgan's heartbeat quickened. She counted 4 men inside, silent silhouettes behind the dark glass. They didn't stop, but they slowed just enough that Ava, and anyone paying attention, would know they were looking. Taking stock of the distances, house to stand to road, Morgan mentally ran through safety protocols she'd hoped never to use again. Her mind clicked into gear, her Marine training blossoming from beneath years of domestic life. When Jonas arrived that evening, he found Morgan quietly polishing a disassembled rifle in the back shed, away from Ava's curious eyes. It wasn't the standard hunting rifle many in the county owned. It was a sleek, long-range tactical piece she had kept stashed away since leaving the service. Jonas wasn't surprised to see it. He knew all about Morgan's past life. Still, the look in his eyes was a mixture of concern and relief. Together, they discussed the SUVs, the rumored shipments, and the creeping sense of dread building in the region. If Los Fieras had earmarked Willowbend County as part of their smuggling pipeline, they would not hesitate to strong-arm any landowner who blocked or complicated their routes. Ava's stand, sweet as it was, just happened to be positioned at an intersection that offered a prime vantage point along a seldom-watched stretch of road. That small fact might place them in the crosshairs. 2 days later, Deputy Reyes came around in her cruiser, wearing the tense expression of an officer who has far too many unanswered questions. She'd noticed an influx of out-of-state plates around the county, though no official records existed of any major construction or business that would warrant newcomers. Members of the local council whispered about unidentified men approaching landowners, offering suspiciously large sums of money for seemingly worthless fields. Reyes was convinced that somewhere up the chain of command, the sheriff's office was being leaned on to look the other way. She advised Morgan to stay alert, especially at the produce stand. Before leaving, she quietly asked Morgan if she still had it in her to handle a crisis if one arose. The two women locked eyes for a moment, and Morgan gave a single curt nod. Despite these concerns, Morgan tried to keep life normal for Ava. She pretended to fuss over the stand's finances, teaching Ava how to count out change precisely, and praise the little girl's entrepreneurial spirit. But at night, when Ava was asleep, Morgan would patrol the property under the cover of darkness, moving silently among the shadows like a specter. She scanned the edges of her fields through a night vision scope, ever watchful for unfamiliar shapes and unusual movements. Each time a coyote howled in the distance, Morgan's heart thumped, her mind flashing with memories of faraway battlegrounds. She told herself that any threat could still be deterred, that perhaps Los Fieras would pick another route and spare Willowbend. Yet, each morning, new tire marks on dusty roads or fresh rumors swirling through town made it clear trouble was coming. The confrontation that solidified Morgan's worst fears arrived one late morning under a punishing sun. Ava, smiling as brightly as ever, was assisting an elderly couple with selecting tomatoes, the transaction as wholesome and charming as small-town life could be meriting. But as soon as the couple's old pickup rattled away, two well-dressed men approached from the opposite side of the road. Their arrival was incongruous. They wore crisp suits and polished shoes, wholly unsuited to Willowbend's dusty terrain. Ava, uncertain yet polite, greeted them with a cautious smile. One of the men, who introduced himself in a heavily accented voice as Arturo Molina, asked if the property was for sale. He produced a sleek business card printed with Molina Import-Export and offered it to Ava with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. From the porch, Morgan had already risen to her feet, every muscle coiled. In a matter of heartbeats, she walked over to stand protectively beside Ava. When Arturo repeated his question, asserting that his associates were interested in acquiring farmland in the area, Morgan responded with a firm, unwavering statement, "Not for sale." The second man, equally polished but exuding cold menace, chuckled under his breath as though amused by her directness. He suggested that she might reconsider if she knew the consequences of refusing such a generous deal. Morgan's blood boiled, but her expression remained calm. For Ava's sake, she kept her voice level. "We're not interested," she repeated. Arturo's eyes flicked toward Ava, and he made a small, mocking show of turning the business card over in his fingers. "It would be a real tragedy," he said softly, "if anything bad happened here." The implied threat hung in the searing air. Then he placed the card on the wooden stand. "In case you change your mind." With a final nod, both men retreated, climbing into a black SUV that had been idling just out of sight. Ava's face had grown pale, and she clutched the handle of her coin box as if it were a security blanket. "Mama," she murmured, "what did that man mean?" Morgan laid a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder, forcing a steady tone. Nothing you need to worry about, honey. Let's close up early today. As they stacked baskets and carried them back toward the barn, Ava didn't ask more questions, but her wide, uneasy eyes spoke volumes. Despite Morgan's efforts, the innocence of the produce stand had been shattered in a single confrontation. Morgan couldn't let Ava see the swirl of turmoil in her own mind. She couldn't let her daughter know that this was precisely the kind of threat Morgan had once faced down overseas. Only now it was here, on their doorstep, threatening the child she loved more than anything in the world. That evening, after Ava was safely in bed, Morgan rummaged through a locked trunk in her closet and pulled out a battered satchel brimming with old Marine Corps mementos and gear. Her sniper rifle was there, carefully disassembled. She ran her fingers along the metal, memories flashing of dusty outposts and nights when the slightest noise could mean life or death. Her gaze hardened. If these men returned, she would be ready. She would protect her daughter, this farm, and this community at any cost. 2 days later, Jonas Ford invited Morgan to a discreet meeting at his property, offering the cover story of a casual barbecue. But this was no social event. Arriving with Ava in tow, who was thrilled about potential hot dogs and lemonade, Morgan quickly noticed that Deputy Reyes and Father Andrew Sullivan, the local priest, were also present, along with a handful of longtime Willowbend residents she knew had ties to law enforcement or military service. The atmosphere beneath Jonas's big oak tree felt tense, as though they all expected trouble to erupt at any moment. Ava and a few other children played a distance away, laughing and chasing each other. That freed Jonas, Reyes, and Morgan to examine a series of photographs spread across a folding table. The images showed men offloading crates under the cover of night in abandoned barns and seldom-used sheds. In the background loomed the silhouettes of black SUVs, all matching descriptions from across the county. Reyes pointed to one blurry figure. "We think he's Mateo Gonzalez, one of Los Fierras' mid-level enforcers. Word is they're expanding distribution routes for illegal weapons, moving them through farms that seem quiet and off the radar." Father Andrew, unassuming in his simple shirt and slacks, spoke up softly. "We've got a moral duty to protect the vulnerable in our community. Families around here are frightened, but most don't even realize the scope of what's happening." Jonas, arms folded, nodded gravely. He explained that the main sheriff's office in the regional hub was surprisingly hands-off. "I've got a hunch certain people in higher positions might be getting paid to keep blinders on." Morgan scanned the photos, remembering the men who'd threatened Ava's stand. She recognized the style of dress, the stance, the subtle power dynamic in each image. These were professionals. "We need to prepare," she said, voice low. The quiet confidence in her tone made several heads turn. They all knew Morgan had served overseas, but none fully understood just how skilled she truly was. Even Jonas, who had gleaned bits and pieces of her background over the years, didn't know the full tally of her expertise. The simple statement, "We need to prepare," carried the weight of experience that none of them doubted. As the so-called barbecue concluded, Morgan escorted Ava back to their pickup truck. Ava nibbled on a leftover cookie, completely unaware of the hush that had fallen over the adults' conversation. Morgan glanced in the rearview mirror at Jonas, who gave a slight nod, a wordless confirmation that they would stand together. On the drive home, with Ava dozing in the passenger seat, Morgan mulled over strategic points on her land: how the greenhouse offered a natural vantage, how the barn provided cover, how the orchard's rows could be used for concealment if needed. She made mental notes of where she might hide supplies, or how to create simple perimeter alarms. She also recalled each person at Jonas's gathering, the strengths they brought. Reyes had law enforcement training, Father Andrew had the moral authority to rally frightened families, and Jonas had the know-how of an old-school sheriff who had seen a thing or two. If Los Fierras truly meant to push deeper into Willowbend, they would discover that these quiet country folks weren't as defenseless as they seemed. Morgan's covert preparations began in earnest after she noticed a marked escalation in the cartel's tactics. She would rise at 4 in the morning, don dark clothing, and circle her farm's perimeter under the faint glow of starlight, checking for disturbed soil or footprints that weren't hers. A few times she discovered cigarette butts or flattened patches in the grass where someone might have crouched to watch. With each sign of intrusion, her resolve hardened. Gone was the faint hope that Los Fieros would simply move on. By all appearances, they were systematically scouting every inch of the county, including her property. During the day, Morgan taught Ava to discreetly watch for unfamiliar vehicles. She tried to frame it as a game, spotting the stranger cars for license plate bingo. Yet Ava, perceptive beyond her years, sensed there was more at stake. Still, she didn't complain. After all, this was the only home she knew, and her mother was everything to her. In turn, Morgan ensured Ava knew exactly where to hide if danger arrived. An old storm cellar with a reinforced door, originally intended as a tornado shelter. Morgan quietly upgraded it with emergency rations, a radio, and a hidden lock, features she hoped Ava would never need. Meanwhile, Jonas, Reyes, and a circle of trusted individuals mapped out suspicious activity across the region. Using informal channels, they learned that shipments of firearms, possibly slated for international transfer, were being funneled along rural roads. The farmland in Willowbend offered countless back routes to major highways, making it attractive to criminal enterprises looking to avoid border patrol. Despite these ominous findings, they faced an uphill battle. Official support was lukewarm at best. Each time Deputy Reyes filed a report, the system responded with bureaucratic inertia. Jonas confided to Morgan, "We'll have to handle this ourselves to some degree. They're ignoring us, or worse." One scorching afternoon, an SUV pulled up to Ava's stand once again, this time with only two men inside. Morgan was working in the greenhouse but had a clear line of sight to the stand. She watched Ava tense, the little girl's knuckles whitening on the corners of her painted money box. Emerging from the greenhouse, Morgan strode toward them. The men, feigning casual interest in the produce, asked several probing questions about who owned the land, how many workers they employed, and whether anyone else lived on the property. Morgan deflected, her voice polite but cold. She knew their real purpose was intimidation, a final courtesy before they escalated to more direct methods. After they left, Ava swallowed hard and asked, "Mama, they're not really interested in tomatoes, are they?" Morgan gently hugged her and answered truthfully, "No, baby girl, they're not." Later that night, once Ava was asleep, Morgan methodically cleaned her sniper rifle on the kitchen table. Each metallic click and whir a reminder of the life she once led. She thought about her final deployment, the missions she had carried out, and the vow she'd made after leaving the service, that she would never again use these skills in violence. But now, faced with the direct threat to her daughter and her community, Morgan realized that vow might have to be broken. Her farm wasn't just a piece of land, it was Ava's future, and Morgan would go to any length to defend it. The tension erupted one late afternoon when Jonas came barreling down the dirt driveway, truck tires kicking up a swirling cloud of dust. He jumped out, clutching a stack of photos and a frantic expression. "Morgan," he said urgently, "it's worse than we thought." Spreading the photos on the hood of his truck, he pointed to images of a barn about 15 miles north that had been turned into a full-scale staging area, men in tactical gear moving heavy crates, armed lookouts patrolling around the structure. The brand stamped on some crates looked suspiciously like it might belong to military-grade weapons. "Los Fieros is establishing a base," Jonas said, voice low. "This is beyond just passing shipments. They're setting up for something big. Possibly the kind of scale that draws federal attention if it goes wrong." He exhaled sharply and then locked eyes with Morgan. "And from the chatter we've intercepted, they see your farm as key real estate. Your road is perfect for secret transport. They want you to sell or bow out quietly." Morgan's hands tightened into fists. In the distance, Ava was sprinkling water on her potted herbs beside the produce stand, oblivious to the storm brewing. "They threatened my daughter. They threatened my land," Morgan said. "They don't know who they're dealing with." Jonas recognized the steely glint in her eyes, the same look that made criminals think twice back when he was sheriff. But Morgan's was sharper still, honed by experiences Jonas could only guess at. They discussed strategy. Jonas believed the next step would be for Los Fieros to apply more intense pressure, likely an act of aggression, something to scare Morgan off for good. Deputy Reyes had arranged a secret meeting with a DEA contact, but the earliest they could act was still a few days away. "We might not have that long," Jonas admitted. Morgan walked with him to the old barn on her property, revealing carefully concealed vantage points and security measures she'd put in place. Jonas whistled low, shaking his head in amazement. "You've built yourself quite a fortress, Morgan." "This was never meant to be a fortress," she replied quietly. "Just a home, but I'll do what I must." She then showed Jonas a hidden cache of supplies, radio equipment, camouflage netting, tripwire alarms. Jonas's expression reflected both admiration and sadness. "I hate that it's come to this," he murmured. Morgan nodded. "So do I." That night, Jonas stayed late, helping reinforce doors and windows, rigging an early warning system near the orchard. They used old tin cans, fishing lines, and scraps of metal in ways that no typical burglar would expect. By the time Jonas left, the moon hung high, silver and watchful. Morgan, fatigued but resolute, did a final patrol around the house. She peered into Ava's bedroom window, seeing her little girl curled up with a stuffed rabbit, lost in innocent dreams. The sight only fueled Morgan's determination. Come what may, Los Ferros would not harm her daughter, not here, not anywhere. These men from the cartel believed themselves untouchable, unstoppable. But Morgan had faced ruthless enemies before, and this time her motive was far greater than any mission objective. This time she fought for love. The official showdown arrived at sundown on a day so hot the fence posts seemed to shimmer. A battered pickup truck sputtered to a stop by the produce stand, and three Cartel enforcers jumped out. These men were no longer making polite inquiries or half-veiled threats. They marched straight toward Ava's stand as if they owned the place. Ava, startled, glanced at Morgan, who was in the yard tending to some potted peppers. Morgan dropped her watering can and moved swiftly. "Morgan Landry," one of the men said, rolling her name across his tongue with a sneer. "We need to talk." He flicked his wrist, and the two behind him fanned out, clearly intending to encircle her. Morgan's heart hammered, but her mind was calm, her training surfacing in every muscle. "My daughter is right there," she said icily, jerking her chin toward Ava. "Whatever you have to say, she doesn't need to hear it." The man's lips curled in a smirk. "We're past worrying about what children see." Before Morgan could retort, another vehicle, a sleek black SUV, came roaring up behind the pickup. Out stepped Arturo Molina, the smooth-talking figure from before, flanked by more armed men. Ava, frightened now, clutched her money box and stared wide-eyed at the confrontation. Molina didn't waste time on pretense. "I warned you, Ms. Landry. This land is valuable to us, and you've become quite the thorn." He nodded toward Ava's stand with cold disdain. "Is your little business worth watching your world burn?" Morgan silently placed herself between Ava and the men, lips set in a grim line. She gave Ava a single directive. "Go inside, honey." Reluctantly, the girl obeyed, shooting nervous glances back. Morgan turned her attention to Molina. "If you think you can scare me by showing up with goons, you're mistaken." Her hands were at her sides, but she was mentally calculating distances, angles, potential cover. She noticed Jonas's truck coming down the road. He must have spotted the unusual gathering. Good. Backup was on the way. Molina's men made a show of brandishing weapons. One stepped forward, raising a pistol in Morgan's direction. The move was all Morgan needed. Swift as lightning, she pivoted sideways, her left hand grabbing the muzzle while her right forearm slammed into the man's wrist. The gun spun out of his grip, landing in the dust with a thud. Another man lunged, but Morgan dropped low, swept his legs out from under him, and sent him sprawling. Heart pounding, she seized the moment to back away, ensuring Ava was safely inside the house. Molina signaled a retreat, possibly surprised at Morgan's combat prowess. "We'll be back," he snarled, picking up the men who'd fallen, hustling them toward the SUV. "You've made a huge mistake." The vehicles roared off in a cloud of dust just as Jonas pulled up, jumping from his truck with a rifle in hand. He looked at Morgan, who stood breathing hard, fists clenched. "I'm sorry I was late," Jonas muttered, scanning the yard. Morgan only nodded, adrenaline still surging. Ava peered from the house window, tears staining her cheeks. The stand lay overturned, produce strewn about. In that moment, Morgan accepted that any hope of a peaceful resolution was gone. Los Ferros had escalated the conflict, and it was only a matter of time before they returned with deadlier intent. Deputy Reyes arrived shortly after, radio crackling with partial updates from scattered local law enforcement. Though she took statements and snapped photos of the damage, it was clear her official capacity had limited reach. "I'll file this report," she told Morgan, "but we both know the chain of command might bury it. We're on our own here." Before leaving, Reyes slipped Morgan a piece of paper with a secure phone number on it. "That's a DEA contact who actually wants to help," she explained. "Call it if things get any worse." Inside the house, Morgan found Ava sitting at the kitchen table, arms wrapped around her stuffed rabbit. The little girl blinked up with watery eyes. "Mama, are they going to come back?" Morgan crouched beside her, gently placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Yes, baby," she admitted, her voice soft but unwavering. "But when they do, we'll be ready." Ava nodded, tears clinging to her eyelashes. Then she said something that tightened Morgan's chest. "I'm not scared if you're with me." Morgan embraced her fiercely, saying nothing else because words couldn't capture the flood of protectiveness and love coursing through her veins. Jonas helped gather the scattered produce, right the stand, and patch up the yard. Despite the outward calm, tension was strung as tight as a wire. Morgan slipped him the details of her plan, how she would fortify the property and organize watch shifts with others in the community if necessary. Jonas, wearing the same grim determination, agreed to rally whoever he could. Some older veterans in the area might be willing to stand guard, and Father Andrew had a way of quietly persuading folks to do the right thing. Morgan also had Reyes and that DEA number if the situation became truly dire. Still, it was precarious. Los Fierros was known for bringing in reinforcements, and they rarely left a job half-finished. That night, after locking up the house, Morgan hauled her old trunk out onto the living room rug. Ava was asleep, lulled by sheer emotional exhaustion, but Morgan was restless. She pulled out her specialized rifle, optics, and gear she had kept in storage. Her eyes lingered on an old ID tag from her final deployment. The etched letters Peter Landry stared back at her, along with her blood type and a tattered Marine emblem. Memories washed over her, dusty roads in the Middle East, the smell of gunpowder, the hush that fell over a base before a mission launched. She had once been hailed for 78 confirmed kills, a lethal asset in high-stakes scenarios. She'd left all that behind to raise Ava in peace. Yet now, that very past might be the only way to keep Ava safe. In the early hours before dawn, Morgan emailed an old contact from her service days using encrypted channels. She typed a concise message. "Ghost calling in a favor. Potential small-scale siege scenario. Need eyes or support. Unofficial." She offered just enough detail to convey the urgency. Hitting send, Morgan exhaled. The odds that they could send immediate help were slim, but any advantage or advice might prove vital. As the farmhouse settled into silence, Morgan's eyes remained open in the darkness. On the horizon, she could sense trouble looming as surely as the next day's sunrise. Come morning, the entire county buzzed with news of the confrontation. Word traveled fast in Willowbend. Some neighbors quietly applauded Morgan's bravery, while others whispered worries that she might provoke a savage retaliation. Morgan pushed all gossip aside, focusing on practicalities. She divided her time between reinforcing her property's defenses, adapting old barns, installing hidden cameras, and setting tripwires, and making sure Ava felt secure enough to keep living life with a semblance of normalcy. The produce stand, battered but still functional, reopened. Ava insisted on it. "It's my stand," she said. "I don't want them to scare me away." Jonas, meanwhile, convened a clandestine community meeting at Father Andrew's parish hall. The pews were mostly empty, but a dozen or so trusted folks gathered. A few retired cops, some ranchers with military backgrounds, and local shopkeepers who had seen or heard suspicious activity. Deputy Reyes outlined the overall threat, emphasizing that Los Fierros had significant resources. "We've got scattered sightings of armed men around the county, more than usual," she warned. "They're pushing folks off properties, forcing sales or intimidating them. This is orchestrated." Father Andrew folded his hands. "And you believe Willowbend is a hub in their network?" Reyes nodded. "Too many side roads, too little law enforcement. Ideal place to smuggle contraband. Morgan's farm is a prime location." Jonas stepped in, describing how Morgan's stand had already been targeted, turning the once charming symbol of small-town entrepreneurship into a front line in a clandestine war. The group resolved to form a watch, rotating shifts near known trouble spots, a phone tree for emergencies, and a fallback plan at Father Andrew's church basement if violence spread. The sense of unity was strong, but so was the undercurrent of fear. Everyone knew that if Los Fieras decided to retaliate with full force, there was only so much a ragtag group of locals could do. "If we're going to stand, we stand together," Jonas stated, mustering an air of confidence. Father Andrew echoed the sentiment, reminding them that defending their families and neighbors was a moral imperative. After the meeting, Jonas pulled Morgan aside, quietly relaying that an old friend of his, retired from a federal agency, had also caught wind of the threat. "He says bigger help might come eventually, but we'd better be prepared in the meantime," Jonas reported. Returning home after that meeting, Morgan felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She was grateful not to be alone in this fight, but the weight of responsibility bore down on her. By late afternoon, she was back on her porch, rifle across her lap, scanning the roads. A farmer's day is usually governed by soil and sun, but hers was now governed by vigilance. Ava, still trying to salvage the brightness of childhood, colored pictures on the porch swing. Every so often, she'd glance up to see her mother's tense watch over the horizon. In Ava's eyes, Morgan saw both trust and a flicker of anxiety. No 8-year-old should have to live under looming threats. But Morgan vowed that if trouble came again, she would end it swiftly. She would not let fear become the new normal. The next 3 days brought a lull that felt more ominous than reassuring. No strange vehicles rumbled down the gravel road, and no suits appeared with smug business cards. Yet Morgan sensed a storm gathering. Her old contact from the Marines sent a terse reply indicating a small team of private contractors might pass through the area in the coming week. Unofficial assistance, strictly off record. Meanwhile, Jonas informed her that local chatter picked up rumors of Los Fieras calling in reinforcements from across the border. It was a countdown, each side mobilizing and strategizing for a conflict that felt inevitable. Morgan found fleeting moments of solace in the routines of the farm. She'd wake early to gather fresh eggs, feed the goats, and check the vegetable rows. Occasionally, she and Ava would pick strawberries together, the girl giggling at the red stains on her fingers. For short intervals, Morgan could almost pretend life was normal, but she never let her guard down. Whenever she spotted dust rising on the road, her breath hitched until she identified the approaching vehicle. On the third night of the lull, a thunderstorm rolled in, dark clouds splitting the sky with jagged lightning. The downpour battered the roof, and Ava asked to sleep in Morgan's bed, claiming the thunder was too loud. As Ava drifted off, Morgan sat up, listening not just to the thunder, but also to the possibility of approaching engines muffled by rain. Each rumble in the distance sent her pulse racing. She fingered the cell phone that kept Reyes, Jonas, and Father Andrew on speed dial. At around 2 in the morning, the storm abated. Morgan's nerves were shot, so she walked the perimeter with a flashlight. The beam caught 2 sets of muddy boot prints near the orchard fence, fresh, distinct, and leading away into the tall grass. She followed them for a short distance before losing the trail near the main road. Someone had been snooping, perhaps scoping out vantage points or testing her defenses. Her mind flashed to all the ways an armed intruder could exploit the orchard rows, the barn corners, the stable. She hurried back to the house, double-checking that every door and window was locked. She cursed herself for letting the storm distract her, but truthfully, she couldn't be awake every second. By sunrise, news spread that similar footprints were found near other farms. Jonas and Reyes concluded that Los Fieras must be planning a synchronized strike, testing vulnerabilities all over Willowbend. On her porch, Morgan nursed a cup of coffee and thought about the future. If Los Fieras attacked with the kind of force they were rumored to wield, the town could be overwhelmed. Yet she took grim comfort in knowing that she, Jonas, Reyes, and a slowly growing band of locals would meet that threat head-on. It wasn't just about saving her own child anymore. It was about preserving the entire way of life in Willowbend. As she looked across her farmland, vegetables and flowers glistening with morning dew, Ava still asleep with stuffed rabbit in hand, Morgan silently made a promise. No matter what hell came their way, she'd stand firm, a single mother ready to unleash the formidable warrior that once made her the ghost of distant battlefields. 3 nights of tense watchfulness finally gave way to a chilling dawn. Morgan Landry woke to the sound of her makeshift perimeter alarms jangling. A string of tin cans and bits of metal cleverly rigged near the orchard fence. She raced outside, rifle in hand. There, lying in the dew-soaked grass, she found two men bound with zip ties, both of them bruised and unconscious. Their clothing hinted at cartel affiliation, but it was the pistol that had fallen from one man's holster that confirmed they were no lost hunters. Jonas Ford emerged moments later from the tree line, breathing heavily, rifle slung over his shoulder. Caught them sneaking around the orchard, he explained. They were setting up cameras aimed at your house, likely scoping out vantage points. They dragged the men into the barn and taped their mouths securely, while Deputy Carmen Reyes, summoned by Jonas's frantic call, arrived to record the scene. She photographed the men and phoned in the details to a DEA contact. The atmosphere crackled with intensity, a sense that this small victory, capturing two cartel scouts, might trigger a storm of retaliation. "We'll get them shipped off to a holding facility," Reyes assured Morgan. But she also warned that their success might provoke Los Fieras to escalate faster than they'd intended. Jonas nodded. "They'll come looking for their missing men. We need to lock this place down." Before daybreak, a small group of Morgan's allies converged on her farm. Father Andrew, two retired Marines who lived nearby, and a local nurse named Clara, who had once served as a combat medic. Together, they planned out a protective perimeter with more than just tripwires. They set up hidden vantage points in the orchard, the barn loft, and even the old cattle chute near the rear field. Morgan's skill with camouflage astounded them all. Beneath her instructions, piles of hay and wooden crates became effective cover, and reflective tapes or scattered shards of glass were strategically placed to confuse headlights or disrupt night vision. Father Andrew offered the church basement as a safe haven, should Ava or other community children need to evacuate quickly. They all agreed to a coded radio channel, courtesy of Jonas's leftover law enforcement gear. Morgan's mind rarely wandered from Ava's safety. Whenever she pictured the child's bright eyes and eager hands, her heart clenched with a fierce mix of love and anger. These cartel intruders had not only threatened her daughter's livelihood, but also dared to spy on their home in the dead of night. In response, Morgan buried the part of herself that grieved for her quiet, pastoral life and resurrected the side that had once been called the ghost. Deep in her chest, she felt that old, familiar readiness. She had used it in battle zones half a world away, and now she would employ it here in Willowbend County to safeguard a little girl's produce stand and the farmland that cradled generations of memories. By mid-morning, all that remained of the night's chaos were footprints in the orchard mud and the gnawing certainty that Los Fieras was accelerating its plans. Local rumors flared up by noon. A convoy of unfamiliar vehicles was spotted on the highway, heading straight for Willowbend County. Morgan's phone buzzed constantly with calls or texts from townspeople reporting suspicious sightings. She thought again of the two men currently en route to a secure facility, courtesy of Reyes's DEA contact. The cartel would undoubtedly retaliate. While Morgan's mind braced for conflict, Ava quietly watered her herbs beside the half-rebuilt produce stand, determined to salvage something of her old routine. In that resilience, Morgan found new resolve. Whatever came next, she would meet it head-on. The following day, the tranquil farmland saw more visitors than it had since harvest season. Not all were customers, some were watchers, their vehicles cruising past at suspiciously slow speeds, windows tinted. Morgan recognized them for what they were: scouts and lookouts for Los Fieras, boldly surveying the territory. She overheard one pair speaking Spanish near her driveway. "Ese rancho es la clave." They spoke of her farm as a key location. Morgan, discreetly tucked behind the tall rows of sunflowers, listened in until the men realized they were exposed and sped off. Jonas called in mid-afternoon to warn her that several black SUVs had rendezvoused by an abandoned truck stop on the county line. According to his contact, an informant who preferred anonymity, Los Fieras was gathering a small platoon of armed men. "They're planning a show of force to scare you into abandoning the land," Jonas said grimly. "But we both know they could do far worse." Morgan thanked him for the heads up and then methodically stepped into her barn to set up her vantage point. Through a narrow gap in the boards, she had a near-perfect line of sight on the western approach to her property. She set her rifle on a makeshift rest, calibrating the scope. Each subtle adjustment reminded her of the long nights on Overwatch duty during her final deployment. Only this time, the stakes were even more personal. Before nightfall, Father Andrew arrived with supplies. Inside his beat-up sedan, he carried water jugs, canned goods, first aid kits, and extra batteries for the radio sets. "The church basement is ready," he said quietly, gazing around the farm with worried eyes. "We have a small stockpile there, if families need shelter." "If it comes to that." Morgan nodded, grateful that Father Andrew managed to mobilize the community's moral and logistical support. Father Andrew led a brief prayer with Morgan, Jonas, and the few volunteers standing guard. Even for those who weren't particularly religious, the moment offered a sense of unity and calm before the storm. In the house, Ava quietly finished her dinner, occasionally eyeing the windows. She had placed a cluster of daisies in a cup on the dining table, a child's attempt to bring beauty into a place gripped by fear. "Mama," she asked, "do you promise we'll be okay?" Morgan set aside her half-eaten plate and pulled Ava into a hug. "Yes, I promise," she said, voice firm. "And I keep my promises." Ava nodded, her shoulders loosening slightly. That night, Jonas and two retired Marines, Herschel and Dunn, took first shift, patrolling the outer edges of the farmland with shotguns and radios. Morgan stayed near the barn loft, eyes scanning the faint headlights that occasionally flickered on distant roads. The hush of the fields was deceptive. In her peripheral vision, shapes seemed to move. Perhaps it was just the wind rustling corn stalks, but Morgan refused to let her guard drop. Each hour that passed without incident felt like a gift, yet she remained certain the cartel was testing their defenses. They wanted to see if the stories of a fierce ex-Marine sniper were exaggerated. Soon, they would discover they were not. The cartel's brazen strike came just after midnight on a moonless, humid night. Morgan was resting fitfully in a rocking chair by the front window when the first volley of gunfire shattered the stillness. Startled awake, she grabbed her rifle and sprinted outside, heart pounding. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness near the road, where Jonas and Dunn exchanged shots with unseen figures taking cover behind an SUV. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off gravel. Morgan crouched low and scanned the terrain, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Further up the driveway, Herschel was pinned down behind a tractor, calling into his radio that at least 6 men in tactical gear had advanced on foot. Morgan exhaled, forced her breathing to steady, and raised her scope. Through the greenish glow of night vision, she saw silhouettes darting behind the orchard fence, about 80 yards out. She aimed, squeezed the trigger, and watched one silhouette crumple, the rifle dropping from his hands. Another figure immediately dropped prone, returning fire in her direction. Morgan ducked, crouching behind a water trough, then popped up again at a different angle. One controlled shot, and the second figure also went down. The overhead porch light flicked on inside the house, indicating Ava was awake. Morgan silently prayed Ava would remain crouched in the safe room they'd prepared, an old storm shelter hidden beneath a trap door in the hallway. Across the yard, Jonas cursed into his radio. "2 more by the gate. They're pushing left." Dunn's voice, taut with strain, crackled back. "I see them, taking cover behind the old cattle chute." Another staccato burst of gunfire followed. Morgan pivoted, scanning the orchard again. One of her tripwires triggered a startling explosion. Smoke billowed as a homemade device, non-lethal but disorienting, went off, sending 3 men stumbling. Morgan fired quick shots to disarm them, each bullet expertly placed to incapacitate rather than kill. She was keenly aware that capturing a cartel operative alive could prove more valuable for intelligence. Still, in the swirl of firefights, she didn't hesitate to prioritize her side's safety. If any shot needed to be lethal, she would not flinch. After the initial frenzy of bullets, a tense quiet fell. The distinct roar of an SUV engine shattered the silence, headlights flaring as it reversed. Whoever led this assault must have realized their miscalculation. With Morgan's skill and the prepared defenses, the attackers had found themselves outmatched. Jonas, panting heavily, surveyed the damage. Dunn waved a flashlight over 2 injured cartel men, both groaning on the ground. Herschel crawled out from behind the tractor, wiping sweat from his brow. "They came in heavy," he muttered. Morgan darted into the house to check on Ava. The girl sat tucked under a makeshift blanket in the storm shelter, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were wide and fearful, but she wasn't crying. It's okay, Morgan whispered. They're gone now. You did everything right. Outside, the yard lay scarred by gunfire and the pungent odor of burnt gunpowder. The orchard fence was riddled with bullet holes, and Jonas's truck windows were shot out. Yet the defenders had prevailed, capturing or driving off the small force. Still, one look at the battered yard told Morgan this was just the beginning. At daybreak, Willowbend County awoke to news that a fierce overnight firefight had rattled Morgan Landry's farm. With local law enforcement slow to respond, thanks in part to political pressure or complicity from those in power, everyone now recognized that the cartel had escalated beyond intimidation. The sign at Ava's stand hung crooked, bullet holes marring the bright yellow paint she'd so lovingly applied. But Ava refused to let Morgan take it down. "I can fix it," she insisted, running a small hand over the splintered wood. "I'll paint over the holes." Deputy Reyes arrived with an expression that balanced relief and sorrow. Relief that Morgan and the others were alive. Sorrow that her department's inaction forced them into a firefight. She noted shell casings and bullet impacts with grim efficiency, forwarding photos to a DEA contact she trusted. Clara, the nurse, was already bandaging minor cuts Jonas and Dunn had suffered from flying debris. The orchard was scattered with more evidence of the battle: tripwires, a smoke device that hadn't fully detonated, and two wounded cartel men who'd been subdued and zip-tied. Reyes organized their transport to the county jail, though she warned it was likely a short-term fix. "I don't trust half the folks in charge," she admitted. "There's too much money in Los Fierros' pockets." Morgan was resolute as she carefully inventoried her equipment. She discarded bent rifle casings, relabeled supply crates, and made a mental list of everything that needed replacement. She barely registered her exhaustion. Ava still needed breakfast, the animals still required feeding, and the farm laborers wouldn't pause just because a battle had rolled through the yard. Over a quick meal of scrambled eggs and bacon, she found Ava uncharacteristically silent. The little girl stared at the bullet holes in the walls. "Are we going to have to leave?" she finally asked. Morgan shook her head. "I'm not giving up our home, Ava. Not to them." Word of the firefight galvanized the local community. Father Andrew's phone rang off the hook with offers of help from parishioners: lumber to fix fences, extra hands to fortify barns, even donations of homemade canned goods for those who stood guard through the night. A surge of solidarity rippled across Willowbend. While some families packed their belongings and fled to safer areas, a surprising number of people decided to stay and resist. Their reasoning was simple: if Morgan Landry could stand firm against these criminals, maybe they could too. Jonas oversaw the arrival of more volunteers. At one point, a trio of older men, wiry, sun-baked ranchers, showed up in a rumbling pickup. They introduced themselves as retired law enforcement from neighboring counties, bearing hunting rifles and a will to help. "We heard you folks might need extra eyes," one said, tipping his hat at Morgan. She thanked them, her voice subdued by the weight of a sleepless night. Despite the reinforcements, every look she cast at Ava's stand reminded her that these battles, lethal and relentless, were happening mere yards from where her child tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. While the stand itself had survived, Morgan couldn't shake the dread that the conflict was careening toward a larger, more decisive confrontation. That afternoon, word reaches the farm that the cartel had established a more permanent command post in a dilapidated warehouse near the county's eastern edge. 2 truckloads of armed men had been spotted hauling crates inside, and watchers reported seeing advanced surveillance gear. Morgan convened a hurried strategy session in her living room, the table crowded with Jonas, Deputy Reyes, Father Andrew, Clara, and a handful of seasoned volunteers. The central question: should they strike first or wait for the cartel's next move? Jonas argued for a preemptive effort. "They're just going to keep coming, and we'll keep fending them off on our land. If we can disrupt their central operation, maybe we put them on the defensive." Father Andrew stroked his chin and added, "Yet direct confrontation means more risk to civilians. We need to be sure the rest of the town is safe." Reyes shared intel from her DEA contact. The warehouse was a critical node for Los Fierros, storing not just firearms but also documents and electronic devices that could link their network to high-level corruption. If local forces could infiltrate and secure that data, it might blow the lid off the whole operation. forcing genuine federal intervention. Morgan listened quietly, weighing each argument. While a part of her was tempted to strike at the source, she worried about leaving Ava and the farm exposed. She also recalled her Marine training. Defending a position can be easier if you know the land well. Offensive maneuvers carried higher risks, especially with a small group. "We hold our ground," she finally said, her tone brooking no argument. "If they're amassing that much weaponry, an attack on the warehouse might be suicidal without proper support. Let's instead ensure the county's safer places, like the church and the community center, can shelter people if it comes to that. We focus on turning Willowbend into a stronghold they can't breach." The plan became twofold: fortify key community locations and set up a neighborhood watch network that fed information to Jonas and Reyes. The old church basement was outfitted with cots, blankets, medical supplies from Clara, and stockpiled food. The community center's basement stored extra water barrels and a generator. Volunteers who could not physically fight were assigned to these refuges, ready to receive families, especially children. In parallel, Morgan and her most reliable fighters installed additional defenses at the farm, calibrating vantage points, planting camouflage nets, and setting up signals with flares or radios. By sunset, people from all over Willowbend trickled in with offers of help, from farmhands who brought welding torches to patch fences, to amateur radio enthusiasts who rigged a communication system that stretched across several townships. In one corner of the property, Ava helped an elderly neighbor paint wooden boards, turning them into cheerful signs that read, "Caution, private land, no trespassing." It was a child's gesture for a situation that was anything but innocent. Morgan gave her a tired smile, grateful that Ava channeled her fears into small acts of defiance. As the sky darkened, Morgan surveyed the new fortifications, feeling a small flicker of hope. This was no longer just her fight. The community had rallied, forging a collective shield against the cartel's aggression. But beneath that hope lay a nerve-rattling truth. Los Fieras wouldn't take this resistance lightly. If they were sophisticated enough to set up a command post, they were certainly capable of launching a well-coordinated assault. When that moment arrived, Morgan intended to be ready. Nightfall brought no immediate attack, but tension hung so thick in the humid air that Morgan felt she could slice it with a knife. She barely slept, alternating between quick naps and restless patrols with Jonas and the other volunteers. Each shift, she peered through her rifle scope at the roads, checking for headlights or the faint hum of approaching engines. The orchard, with its bullet-riddled fence and trampled rows, felt eerily silent. Even the night insects seemed subdued. Shortly before midnight, Ava appeared on the porch, rubbing her tired eyes. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured, hugging her stuffed rabbit. She lingered beside Morgan, who was seated on a wooden chair, rifle propped against the rail. The little girl stared into the darkness as though expecting enemies to materialize among the swaying shadows. Morgan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm okay, Mama," Ava said, attempting a brave front. "Just wanted to make sure you were too." Jonas, standing by the porch steps with a flashlight, cleared his throat. "Morgan, we got some intel from a neighbor who spotted 3 vehicles heading toward the old highway. Could be nothing, but we should keep eyes on it." Morgan nodded, then turned to Ava with a soft smile. "It's time for bed, sweetheart. I'll be fine out here." Ava reluctantly agreed and trudged back inside. In that moment, Morgan felt a pang of sorrow at her daughter's childhood was scarred by armed patrols and ominous nightly vigils. Around 2 in the morning, heavy footsteps thudded against the porch stairs. Dunn, panting, relayed that a small drone had been spotted hovering near the orchard. "They're surveilling the farm again," he reported. Herschel took a shot at it, but it zipped away. This confirmed Los Fieras was stepping up their reconnaissance. Morgan exchanged a grave look with Jonas. Attacks by foot soldiers were dangerous enough. If the cartel was employing drones and advanced gear, it meant their resources were deeper than the community had hoped. The next several hours passed in uneasy watchfulness. By dawn, a hush still blanketed the farmland, with no sign of another armed assault. Clara brewed coffee in a big pot on Morgan's stove, distributing it to bleary-eyed volunteers. Father Andrew led a short sunrise prayer for those who wanted to join, offering words of fortitude and unity. Even those who were not religious seemed comforted by the communal gathering. Just as Morgan started to think the new day might remain calm, A truck rattled up the driveway. A tall, broad-shouldered man hopped out, one of the private contractors her old Marine contact had promised. He introduced himself simply as Rourke. With him were three others, all looking professional and ex-military, sporting nondescript gear. "We heard you might need a hand," Rourke said, scanning the property with practiced eyes. Morgan nodded, her relief only slightly tempered by caution. Accepting help from off-the-record operators was risky, but if they could bolster her defenders, it might tip the balance. "Welcome to Willowbend," she replied wryly. "Hope you don't mind the heat or the bullets." Rourke and his small team quickly integrated themselves into the farm's defenses, adjusting Morgan's strategic layouts with insights gleaned from their own experiences. They rigged more sophisticated perimeter alarms, replaced amateur tripwires with near-silent sensors that would trigger coded vibrations on handheld devices. Jonas, impressed by their expertise, conferred with them constantly. "You all served together with Morgan?" he asked one evening, curiosity winning out. Rourke only nodded, offering no further details. Morgan had told Jonas about her old sniper unit, known for missions that rarely made headlines. He understood better than to pry. Meanwhile, tension built around Willowbend. More families packed up and left, unwilling to risk a showdown with the notorious Los Fieras. But an unexpected wave of volunteers continued to pour in, relatives from nearby counties, some carrying supplies or old hunting rifles, others simply prepared to stand watch and make a point, as they put it. Even the small businesses in town pitched in. The cafe delivered thermoses of coffee and sandwiches to Morgan's farm each afternoon, while the hardware store owner contributed leftover fencing materials and nails. It felt like the entire community was uniting around this one patch of land, refusing to yield to fear. Ava's produce stand, once just a modest venture for a little girl, became a symbol of defiance. Though riddled with bullet holes, it remained upright. Each day, Ava gingerly replaced a broken board or repainted a chipped corner. Locals, coming to check on the farm, would purchase fresh tomatoes or peppers from her stand, paying well above the listed price. It was less about the produce, more about standing together. Morgan kept a watchful eye on Ava, ensuring she stayed close and always knew the route to the storm cellar. Each time Morgan scanned the horizon with her rifle, the sight of that brave little stand renewed her purpose. Then, just after sundown one evening, a convoy of 3 SUVs rumbled down the main road, halting at the entrance to Morgan's property. Through binoculars, she saw at least a dozen armed men emerging, each moving with deliberate caution. Rourke muttered, "They're better trained than the last group." Morgan recognized the stances. These were likely ex-military types on the cartel payroll. She alerted Jonas, Reyes, and the rest of her defenders via radio. Father Andrew, safe at the church, ready to receive any fleeing families. At the front of the column stood a man in a pristine white shirt, Arturo Molina, the same smooth-talking visitor who once slipped a business card onto Ava's stand. A bullhorn crackled. "Morgan Landry, we know you're in there," he announced. "We are offering one final chance. Step away from this property. Surrender yourselves. No one has to die tonight." The brazen threat rippled through the defenders like a chill. Morgan, perched in the barn loft with her rifle trained on the newcomers, suppressed the old swirl of battlefield nerves. She clicked her radio. "Positions? Hold fast. No one fires unless they fire first." Over the bullhorn, Molina added, "A child doesn't belong in a war zone. Think carefully about what you're doing." Morgan's jaw tensed, fury boiling beneath her calm exterior. This time, the cartel had come en masse, determined to break her once and for all. Night cloaked the farmland in a hush that could have been peaceful, if not for the presence of heavily armed men. Morgan lay prone in the barn loft, her scope sweeping over the SUVs. She counted muzzle flashes from the muzzle attachments on the men, noticing top-tier weaponry, potentially stolen from military sources. Rourke and his team took up flanking positions around the outbuildings, while Jonas, Dunn, and Herschel spread out behind reinforced fences. A silent tension gripped the defenders, each waiting for the first spark of violence. Molina's bullhorn crackled again. "We have no quarrel with your community, Ms. Landry. We only want to conduct certain business through this route. You're the one insisting on war." Morgan clenched her teeth, remembering the terror on Ava's face when these men threatened her at the stand. The retort formed in her mind. You brought war to our doorstep. Instead, she clicked her radio and whispered, no response. Let them make the first move. Seconds later, the first shot rang out, whether by accident or a deliberate provocation she didn't know. It whizzed past the fence, splintering wood. That single gunshot shattered the standoff, unleashing a cascade of gunfire from both sides. Morgan exhaled, steadied her aim, and took a controlled shot at the source of muzzle flash, watching through her scope as a cartel gunman dropped. More gunfire erupted along the orchard edge, tracer rounds lighting the night. In the chaos, Ava crouched in the storm cellar, whispering to her stuffed rabbit as explosions of sound rattled the farmhouse walls. A wave of grim determination kept Morgan focused. Every bullet she fired, every call she did over the radio was to ensure her daughter's safety. Jonas, pinned behind an overturned trough, yelled into his headset that a group of cartel men were attempting to loop around the barn from the south. Rourke responded with short clip commands, dispatching his teammates to intercept. Moments later, a thunderous boom signaled that one of the remote charges had detonated, likely triggered by the intruders. Flashes of orange fire illuminated swirling plumes of dust. The orchard, once a place of calm, became a hotbed of frantic movement. Morgan shifted her position, dropping to a lower vantage in the barn to avoid the bright muzzle flashes that painted her as a target. A volley of bullets pinged off the metal roof, and she flattened herself to avoid ricochets. Faintly through her earpiece, she heard Father Andrew's voice relaying updates about families seeking refuge at the church. Despite the chaos, the community was holding together. Then a deep-throated roar announced the arrival of more vehicles. 2 additional SUVs screeched to a halt on the main road, disgorging more men. They're bringing reinforcements, Jonas hissed into the radio. Morgan's heart thumped even harder. Gunfire lit up the perimeter fences as the defenders struggled to keep pace. She lined up her next shot, took it, then shifted vantage points again, a swirl of adrenaline fueling her every motion. The orchard lights flickered. The generator might have taken a bullet. Shadows lengthened, confusion growing, but Morgan kept her cool. She'd fought in night battles halfway around the globe, but never before had so much hinged on protecting a single small corner of farmland. An hour into the battle, a haze of gun smoke hung over Morgan's property. The orchard was pockmarked with bullet holes, and the barn's once peaceful interior echoed with sporadic bursts of gunfire. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the tractor and other metal implements that had been hauled out as makeshift barricades. Despite the onslaught, the defenders refused to abandon their ground. Each breath felt like a marathon sprint in Morgan's lungs, yet her mind remained sharp, scanning for targets, issuing directives, listening for every update over the crackling radio. Rourke's voice came through. We're pushing them back on the north side, but they've got heavy weapons. If they breach that perimeter, we'll lose vantage. Morgan slid down the barn ladder, reloading as she landed, then darted through the shadows toward the northern orchard. En route, she passed Jonas, who clutched a wound on his forearm, but insisted he was fine. She pressed extra ammo into his hand, muttered a quick, hang in there, and pressed on. At the orchard's edge, she found Rourke pinned behind a fallen apple tree, exchanging fire with 4 cartel operatives who had advanced dangerously close. Morgan dropped her prone, adjusted her rifle, and inhaled steadily. One shot took down an operative, a second shot landed near another, forcing him behind cover. Rourke seized the moment, hurling a flashbang that popped with a brilliant, disorienting light. When the cartel operatives staggered, Morgan and Rourke moved in, subduing them with swift, well-placed blows. They bound the captives' wrists with plastic ties, ensuring they'd cause no further harm. The lull in gunfire, however brief, allowed Morgan to check the horizon. Headlights glowed on the main road. Another wave of vehicles, or possibly reinforcements for the defenders. Fear clutched her heart at the thought of more cartel troops, but then a familiar voice crackled over the radio. Deputy Reyes, state troopers are en route, but I'm getting conflicting orders from the sheriff's office. They might take their time. Morgan closed her eyes in frustration. Even with proof of a large-scale shootout, local bureaucracy was still dragging its feet. Lives were on the line while politics played out behind the scenes. Just then, a staccato burst of automatic fire tore through a line of shrubbery near the barn, followed by Herschel's bellow. "They're trying to circle behind us!" Morgan sprinted back, heart pounding. Rourke and his team fanned out, taking advantage of the orchard's geometry to block potential flanking. The farm felt like a battlefield from an old war movie. Smoke drifting, fences splintered, the distinctive tang of gunpowder thick in every breath. Even in the midst of the chaos, Morgan's thoughts flickered to Ava. Had she stayed hidden? Was the cellar still secure? She forced herself not to dwell on the what-ifs, trusting that their defensive plan would protect the child. Right now, her responsibility was to fight. Another wave of gunfire erupted near the tractor shed. Morgan gritted her teeth and pressed forward, rifle at the ready. The orchard might never again be the sanctuary of peace she'd cultivated, but she would defend it, and Ava's future, with every ounce of skill she possessed. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, dawn was only a few hours away. Morgan and her allies steadily wore down the cartel's offensive. Los Fieras, well-armed and well-funded, had not expected such entrenched resistance or such coordinated tactics. Although the farmland bore the scars of conflict, the defenders maintained control of the main house, the barn, and the orchard perimeter. Scores of bullet casings littered the dirt, and several injured cartel enforcers lay bound, awaiting proper custody. Melina's voice, bitter and frantic, suddenly boomed over the bullhorn again, this time from a safer distance. "Miss Landry, you don't know who you're dealing with. This operation is bigger than you realize. Back off, and I can spare your precious daughter the horror of watching you die." The threat struck a nerve in every defender who heard it. Jonas, wincing from his bleeding forearm, spat on the ground, face contorted in anger. Rourke's grip tightened on his rifle. Far from cowering, Morgan felt a calm fury settle over her. She clicked her own handheld megaphone, borrowed from Jonas's truck. "You've attacked my home, threatened my community, and terrorized my child," she replied, voice echoing across the battered fields. "There's no backing off now. Either leave or face the consequences." For a moment, it seemed Melina might rally one last surge, but then a frantic exchange of Spanish barked across the air. The cartel's chain of command splintered. Some men, seeing no path forward, jumped into their SUVs and tore away from the property at reckless speeds. Others, locked in gunfights with the defenders, found themselves isolated and outmaneuvered. As the eastern sky began to lighten, the tempo of violence lessened. By first light, only scattered pockets of resistance remained. Morgan, slipping through the orchard in a slow, methodical sweep, encountered two cartel gunmen crouched behind a shattered water barrel. They surrendered after a single warning shot. She zip-tied their wrists and called for Dunn to help escort them to the makeshift holding area in the barn. Rourke confirmed another group had laid down arms near the orchard's western fence line. The hush that fell over the battlefield felt deafening in contrast to the night's barrage of noise. A sudden roar of an engine drew everyone's attention to the main road, where Melina's SUV, tires shredded, windows riddled with bullet holes, lurched to a halt. He stumbled out, clutching at his shoulder, eyes wild. For a fleeting second, Morgan's rifle crosshairs landed on him. She had a clear shot, but something inside her shifted. Instead of pulling the trigger, she gave a single command over the radio: "Take him alive." Jonas and Herschel converged, guns raised. Melina glared at Morgan, spitting curses in Spanish, but he had no fight left. With his good arm, he put his hands up, the bullhorn clattering to the ground. By sunrise, the dusty yard was strewn with proof of the cartel's defeat. Discarded weapons, bullet-riddled vehicles, and men with their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Morgan's farmhouse still stood, battered but unbowed. The produce stand, though pocked with fresh holes, remained upright. The orchard, while damaged, was still her orchard, and Ava was safe, emerging cautiously from the cellar to find her mother alive and victorious. The weight of relief threatened to buckle Morgan's knees, but she steadied herself. They had won the battle, but the war might continue in the courts and back channels. For now, though, Willowbend County had shown Los Fieras they were not so easily broken. The next hours surged with activity. Deputy Reyes organized the confiscation of weapons, carefully bagging and tagging rifles, pistols, ammunition crates, and even a few high-tech devices presumably used for surveillance. She placed urgent calls to state law enforcement and her DEA contact, insisting that the scale of this operation demanded immediate federal attention. This time, the battered vehicles and the captured cartel members were impossible to ignore. News circulated rapidly. Photos of the farm, scarred by bullet holes yet standing, popped up on social media. Locals hailed Morgan as a hero, while others expressed shock that an internationally connected cartel had been so thoroughly trounced by a small-town coalition. Ava clung to Morgan for most of the morning, silent and wide-eyed. Morgan took her daughter aside, knelt down, and tried to explain in gentle terms why people were calling them brave. "You were brave just by refusing to let your stand be destroyed," Morgan said, voice thick with emotion. "All I did was protect what mattered. Our home, our farm, our family." Ava sniffled. "They really wanted to hurt us." Morgan nodded. "But they're gone now. We have a community that won't let fear win." Throughout the day, townspeople arrived to assist with cleanup. Father Andrew oversaw a makeshift triage station near the old cattle chute, where Clara and others treated minor injuries. Jonas's wounded arm was carefully bandaged, and Rourke patched up a graze on his temple. Local folks showed up with trucks and trailers, helping tow the bullet-ridden SUVs off the property. Dunn and Herschel did a head count of captured cartel members, 15 in total, including Molina. The local jail, though small, temporarily housed them under heavy guard until higher authorities took over. By late afternoon, a convoy of state troopers finally rumbled in, accompanied by a handful of federal agents. One stern-faced agent introduced himself as Special Agent Wilcox. He offered a curt nod at Reyes and asked to speak with the Landry woman in charge. Morgan, too exhausted to offer formalities, explained the entire saga while he took notes. Surveying the wrecked orchard and battered outbuildings, Wilcox's expression wavered between amazement and concern. "You realize you've potentially disrupted an international trafficking ring," he said, tone almost accusatory. "These people won't forget that." Morgan stood her ground. "They came here with guns, threatening my daughter and my neighbors," she replied. "I don't care what they remember." Wilcox asked for a detailed statement, carefully picking through Morgan's recollection of the firefight. He asked about each volunteer's role, the presence of Rourke's team, and the months-long buildup that climaxed in this violent showdown. His pen scratched across a notepad with each piece of information. When Morgan finally finished, he cleared his throat. "We'll need to coordinate with the DEA, but your evidence, these weapons, these captured enforcers, should break open a bigger case." He paused, glancing at the orchard beyond. "Folks like Molina, they tend to talk when their bravado's stripped away." Morgan nodded, releasing a slow breath. She couldn't help but wonder about the repercussions. Would Los Fieros regroup elsewhere, or would this victory ripple outward, discouraging them from ever trying such a brazen incursion again? She refused to let the uncertainty dampen her gratitude for the unwavering community support. As the sun sank low, she felt a glimmer of hope that Willowbend's stand might inspire other small towns threatened by powerful criminal forces to realize they, too, could fight back. Over the ensuing weeks, Willowbend County gradually returned to an uneasy normal. The orchard fences were mended, splintered boards from the farmhouse porch were replaced. Ava's produce stand, now a patchwork of new and salvaged wood, stood taller than before, adorned with fresh coats of yellow paint that nearly hid the bullet scars. Each day, Ava made sure the chalkboard sign read in cheerful letters, "Ava's Garden Goodies, grown with love." And each day, townspeople stopped by not just for tomatoes or peppers, but to pay tribute to the stand that symbolized their collective triumph. Jonas, arms still in a sling, resumed a form of retired sheriff duty, liaising with the local law enforcement and the federal agents who lingered to gather more evidence. The air buzzed with talk of corruption investigations, new arrests in neighboring counties, and the unraveling of a multinational trafficking ring. Indeed, the confiscated gear and testimonies from captured operatives led to the indictments of multiple high-level figures. Deputy Reyes, lauded for her persistence and refusal to bow to intimidation, received a commendation from the state, yet she insisted the true heroes were Morgan, Ava, and the townspeople who risked everything to stand up to a cartel's might. Rourke and his team discreetly left town one morning, their job complete. Before departing, Rourke shook Morgan's hand. "You know how to find us if you ever need backup." he said simply. Morgan thanked him, aware that she might never see these individuals again. But she would always be grateful for the expertise they'd brought and the risk they'd shared in defending her family's land. Father Andrew organized a celebration in the church basement, now no longer a refuge from gunfire, but a gathering place for fellowship. Long tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, and neighbors who had once been strangers shared stories of bravery and unity. A highlight of the evening was Ava's wide-eyed retelling of how her produce stand first came under threat, followed by tears of pride from older folks who remembered simpler days. Clara, ever the community nurse, made sure everyone ate well and took home leftovers. Despite the outward relief, Morgan often caught herself scanning roads for suspicious vehicles, peering into the trees at night for signs of watchers. The scar in her heart reminded her that vigilance was not just a wartime necessity, but a lifelong one, especially when powerful criminals were still active somewhere, plotting or regrouping. Yet each time she felt that pang of caution, she'd look at Ava bent over her little ledger, counting coins from produce sales. She'd remember the unwavering support from Jonas, Reyes, Father Andrew, and the entire volunteer network that had turned a modest farmland into an impenetrable bastion of goodwill. One late afternoon, as the sun gilded the fields in shades of gold, Ava tugged Morgan by the hand. "Come see, Mama," she said, leading her to the newly decorated produce stand. Beside the chalkboard sign stood a small wooden plaque. Painted in white letters, it read, "In honor of Willowbend, where we stand together against fear." Ava beamed. "I thought we should thank everyone, not just us." Morgan's eyes misted. She leaned down to kiss Ava's cheek. "We owe them everything," she said softly, gazing out at the farmland that bore memories of gunfire, yet also promises of fresh starts. This land had tested them all, but it had also made them stronger. A mother's love, a community's spirit, together they had reshaped destiny along these dusty county roads, leaving a legacy of resilience no cartel could ever destroy. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm overwhelmed by the strength and kindness that rose from such a frightening ordeal. When a powerful cartel tried to muscle its way into our quiet countryside, everyone, farmers, families, old friends, and even strangers, stood up for what was right. A little girl's produce stand, once just a quaint roadside attraction, ended up uniting an entire community and showing the criminals that real power doesn't always come from guns. It comes from people working together, protecting what matters most. Today, the damaged barns are rebuilt, the orchard is vibrant again, and that small vegetable stand is still serving fresh produce with a smile. What started as a desperate stand against danger became a shining example of hope and courage. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. We hope it reminds you that even in the darkest times, unity and love can prevail. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below and let us know what you think. Let's keep the discussion going.